how chaotic was today for everyone? Very good. Well, you're in the right place. Welcome. This is the Rubin Museum of Art, and this is a series called Brainwave. And I trust everybody got the Brainwave brochure in the mail, and if they didn't, then there's this innocent-looking little card called Visitor Information Card that was on your seat, and you're welcome to fill that out if you want to be on our mailing list, and especially if you like free stuff. Because I have in my hand 2 tickets for the program on April the 10th, Where Does Life Begin? And it's going to be unlike any other Brainwave program in the sense that it's going to be quite interactive. Now, don't leap to conclusions. You did anyway, didn't you? I tell you, this crowd. Michael Joaquin Gray, who's an artist, has created these life nodes, these DNA-like connective tools, I suppose, that he created a toy out of, which is now selling very well, and MoMA's actually bought the whole set. And he's going to be sitting down with Chris Impey, an astrobiologist, and together with you, the audience, they're going to forge a new life form with these modules. So, and they're going to have a conversation as part of it. So it's going to be very interactive. So if you're interested, do fill out your visit information card. We'll collect them at the end, and then a winning one will be pulled out of a Himalayan basket. And we'll let you know tomorrow about who got the 2 complimentary tickets. I'm Tim McHenry. I'm the producer here at the Rubin Museum of Art, and thank you so much for coming out this evening. This is a program I should say that's really been in the making for the last 10 years. It had its gestation on the mountainsides of Switzerland in Davos at an economic conference at which Piet Hut, the renowned astrophysicist from Princeton, was speaking, as well as Shekhar Kapur, the renowned filmmaker. But they weren't speaking together, but they met. And they asked each other questions about, effectively, the meaning of life. And this dialogue, yes, took place in alpine pastures for a little bit, but then continued by email and then through a series of blogs that they created. And really, to give a context for this dialogue, let's look at some of the passages that that are actually on Shekhar Kapur's website that illustrate the nature of the conversation. For example, Piet Hut says, "Needless to say, if linear time is not real, then a realization of that fact makes one a more effective player in alleged linear time. Just like you can only be an effective film director if you realize that a film is not real, which doesn't mean it's arbitrary." Shekhar Kapur: "I'm going in a different way. I still want to see, because I imagine everything is a picture, time like a little canary in a cage, caged by us. Therefore, I look and say, this is a canary in the cage, and that is the reality. The cage is my mind, and the canary a way of making time absolute. In my mind, I open the cage, and the bird flies away, and just in one whoosh, disappears, as if there were nothing else. I have to destroy the cage and throw myself into chaos." Are you ready for this? So let me tell you, if you didn't know, a little about our conversationalists. Piet Hut has been a professor of astrophysics at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, New Jersey, since 1985. But again, who cares, because time isn't really linear. And he's currently also the head of the program of interdisciplinary studies, and that's really the key for this conversation, because Piet is really engaged in all disciplines and not just astrophysics. His specialties, however, are the very early phases of the Big Bang, thermodynamic behavior of black holes, and we'll get to those, trust me, the supercomputer simulations of collisions of galaxies and of the evolution of star clusters in the center of galaxies. And of course, I'm holding in my hand the pamphlet for the Visions of Cosmos exhibition, which is really the starting point for this conversation. Who's actually been up on the 4th floor and seen that exhibition? Those of you who haven't, go. There's, if only for a film that's 6 minutes and 13 seconds in length, of the known universe that our friends at the American Museum of Natural History put together. And it is awe-inspiring and really puts a lot of things in context, particularly if you've had a chaotic day. I urge you to visit it. And if you can't be bothered to come back to the museum again, we'll forgive you, but you can go on YouTube and check it out there. The Known Universe. You'll be one of 4 million people who have done so to date. Shekhar Kapur. Well, he's a bit of a legend, actually. And he really is one of the few directors who have made the successful transition from Bollywood to Hollywood. His first Hindi film, Masoom, won 5 Filmfare Awards. And in particular, in the light of this exhibition, he had a very, very popular sci-fi film, Mr. India, which is considered one of the iconic films of the 1980s. But it was Bandit Queen that really brought him into international attention and led to his breakthrough film in the West, Elizabeth, which of course led to the breakthrough of Cate Blanchett in her acting career. And it was nominated for 7 Oscars and won the Oscar for Best Makeup, and of course was followed by Elizabeth the Golden Age, which won the Oscar for the Best Costume Design. But Mr. Kapur has many, many other interests other than filmmaking. And one of them is he sits on the board of the Global Water Challenge, which is the world's premier body for water-related issues, and are deeply engaged in a new project, Pani, about the impending water wars in the world. But he's also most recently been known as India's Simon Cowell, as he's been the premier judge on India's Got Talent in its most recent season. And he's a much more compassionate judge than Mr. Cowell, as you can imagine. So let us see whether we can work our way through chaos to some form of meaning through the words and minds of Piet Hut and Shekhar Kapur. Please welcome them.
I don't know if those words were mine. Those words about the canary, I was surprised because it was like 3 a.m. I remember that. We used to have these conversations at 3 a.m. because I was in London trying to work out to see if I could make a film out of Foundation, Asimov's Foundation. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to study the universe and chaos. And it's a time when you start to go beyond yourself. So I was actually listening and saying, my God, those are beautiful words. Could not have come out of me, but they must have. They're on my blog. But they did not come out of me, and that's what I want to talk to you about today also, is that sometimes where does creativity lie? Somebody was just asking me today, said, talk to us about creativity. You can ask me the question, and the question that bothers every creative being is, where does creativity lie? Does it lie within us, or do you access it from somewhere else? Mm-hmm. So we should talk about that. But let me get back to this question of time. I went up to look at the exhibition, and there's a statue of Shiva. And the statue of Shiva in the dance of creation and destruction. Now, the moment you say creation and destruction separated by the act of creation and the act of destruction, you're actually saying there is a linearity of time because you're separating. And yet, in the greatest of all concepts, you say, well, Shiva is explaining the whole idea of chaos. Mm-hmm. And in the idea of chaos, there is no time. So where did the act of destruction, because I can say that to myself quite clearly, okay, by the time you observe the act of destruction, it does not exist. By the time you observe the act of creation, it does not exist. So yeah, it's an intellectual but almost emotional feel that I, by my act of observation, am trying to still the universe, to deal and connect the universe to my ego, to my mind, but it's gone. But So now I've just made a statement, but it's gone. But was it ever there? That's the problem. The moment you start to say that time is not linear, if it's gone, was it ever there? And if it was not there, then how could it be gone? And how could there be an act of destruction and an act of construction and creativity if there's no linearity? And we accept that there's no linearity, so there's no action, there's no... So in the kind of things that we try and explain, this, what we call in Hinduism, this, the whole churning, in that churning, is there a separation that we can observe? Or does not, it does not exist? Over to you.
Well, those are all great questions, of course. I mean, the idea of linear time, of having a past and a very small present and a long future, as if it was a one-dimensional line of time, that is, of course, what we normally use every day as clock time. That is what we use in physics, in scientific discussions. Actually, the whole story is becoming amazingly precise because when I started as a student in astrophysics a few decades ago, we didn't know how old the universe was. We knew it was maybe 20 billion years, maybe 10 billion years, maybe a little bit different. That's sort of roughly the age. But now we know that the universe is 13.7 plus or minus 0.1 billion years old. So I know the age of the universe better than the age of most of my friends. There are very few people to whom I know within 1% the age. So science becomes more and more accurate and more precise within the scientific framework, but we are going to talk today about what we can say about the framework and whether we can go beyond the framework and what the whole notion of a framework means. And if I go back and I say I want to be really, really empirical, science is empirical, if I really want to go to direct experience of what we can directly measure and experience, then we can never experience the past. We can never experience the future. So even though in our theory there is this whole long timeline of billions of years and this very, very small moment of now, as far as our experience goes, we are always in the now. And that is one thread that we started talking about. What can you do with this now which we always find ourselves in? And within the now, all kinds of things appear. The memories of the past appear in the now, the anticipation of the future appears in the now, the idea of a timeline appears in the now, but the only thing we know about what appears really is the presence of appearance. We know that this appearance, there is something present here, some appearance is present, everything else is theory, it is not direct experience.
I want to tell you that one of the big conversations Piet and I used to have was this idea that, since then I've moved on, but I can tell you what. there was a fact that he would say everything is perception and observation, and only perception and observation makes it true, and otherwise it's not true, it does not exist. So I said, you know what, I'm going to hit my hand very hard against the wall and it's pain and blood. And you're saying that if I don't observe it and I don't notice it, it does not exist. Well, that's also true in a way, that it won't exist if you don't, and this idea of duality. I can tell you where it came from. It's been something I've been struggling, and I guess that's why I became a storyteller. Is when I was about 10 years old, we used to, in Delhi, for those of you that come from Delhi, I'm sure some of them had that, it wasn't polluted, and we used to sleep outside on the terraces in summer, keep it cool. And so you could see the sky. There was no light pollution, there was no pollution, and we could see the blanket of the universe out there. And it was about the time when we are taught in physics that everything's something. And if it's only something, it's only something if you can measure it. So you've started to learn that the measurable existence is measurable, and if it's not measurable, then it does not exist. So I used to lie there and say, okay, so if it exists and if it's measurable, I can imagine how far it goes. And I would imagine, and then I would break down and I would start to cry, and I was talking to my father, who was a pediatrician, and said, how long, where does this thing go? And he would say, it goes on forever. So I would try and imagine forever. And when you try and imagine forever, you're in deep shit. You know? And when you try and imagine forever, that's when you start to create stories. So as a 10-year-old, I would sit there or lie there crying with frustration. And finally, I created a story for a guy with an axe. And he was a guy with an axe, and the universe that I could see was a tip of that axe. And it would take forever to come down and break this tree. This universe would explode, except that in another universe, within those atoms, there was another guy with an axe, and that was gone. And people count sheep to go to sleep, and I would count the number of times the axe would hit the tree. And I came up with the fact that all I could do was tell stories to connect myself to forever, and that's why I became Stop. So tell me what the truth is. Still, I'm asking myself that if I stand in forever, there is no distance. Mm-hmm. If I go and stand forever, I'm everywhere. And yet, you tell me in physics, not you, but physics tells me that there is distance. If there's distance, there's linearity of time, because it takes one moment to the other point of moment. So we are contextualized by moments. Tell me if I'm going too fast, but everything's now coming in. There has to be 2 points. And forever doesn't have 2 points, it has 1 point. So then all existence is at 1 point. So there's no time, there's no distance. And there's a duality. In one way, there is 2 points, and in another way, I look at it, there's only 1 point. Bring those two together for me and tell me, how does that happen? Why? Is that a valid question? Right. So I'm not the only one that wonders about it. Right. Okay.
Well, you give beautiful homework. Actually, my memory at around age of 10 or so is a little bit less romantic, I guess, lying under the stars. But it is somewhat similar. I remember my parents were members of the Dutch Reformed Church in Holland, where I grew up. And I remember that the sermons were terribly long, and sometimes during the sermons I started thinking about the meaning of eternity. And it was inspired by the sermons, I'm sure. But the idea that you can have a very long time and then twice that, or 10 times that, and 1,000, and you could go on. I mean, at some point it really becomes mind-boggling. So it is an interesting experiment to do.
Eternity exists in boredom. Okay.
Well, boredom and chaos, I guess. Yeah. All these things touch upon each other. But the meaning of existence is a very interesting question. Like if you have a dream or a movie, your area, at the same time, you can say within the story something exists. You can ask, if you switch on a light switch in a movie, you can say, why does the light go on? You say yes. And what was the reason? Because you hit the light switch. But of course, the real reason from the point outside the movie is the light of the projector and the filmmaker who dreamt up the movie, etc. So the question of what exists, I don't think you can ask it without a framework. Within the framework of physics, we can say very precisely what exists and how it exists. But outside frameworks, the whole notion of existence, I think, is completely up for grabs. And again, if you really go back to your experience independently of any particular framework which you want to bring in theoretically, then I think you have to start with the appearance of something which appears to exist, or even the presence of the appearance of what exists. So the presence is twice removed and in a way more pure, more essential than the notion of existence.
Does everybody get that? Can you imagine me sitting at 3 a.m. reading his emails and saying, "No, okay, well, I can actually that I guess it's something I do understand in a simplistic way, and what I do try and understand and tell me is that the only way you can answer these questions, the only way you can understand what we effectively is measuring the universe. And you cannot actually have a measure of the universe from within the universe. From within the universe, you can only be the universe. And the moment you go outside the universe to measure it, you can come back with data and say, this is how I measure the universe. But there is no outside of the universe because it is all the universe. And so I come back to another contradiction. I have to go outside the universe to measure the universe, but there is no outside. So it's a theoretical outside. So I go into a theoretical outside the universe and come back with theoretical data of the inside, and I come up with that's how it all exists. But why does my mind go outside the universe, and why does my ego go outside the universe? The question of duality. Can I go into duality? Is that right? The question of duality is the fundamental problem that my mind constantly needs a singular definition of everything. And so let me see if let's examine that scientifically. This is the theory. I'm going to postulate something. That a problem is that the ego needs to define, and in definition it confines. And yet existence is many definitions, and you cannot confine it to one definition. So the idea that the illusion is as real as the non-illusion, and they both coexist at the same time, and what we are not able to get is there is no one definition. So come back to the original. If you cannot measure it, it cannot exist. The fact is, if you cannot measure it, it can also exist. But you can also measure it when you look at it from a different point of view. All right, fantastic. I can explain that in a poem. I can explain that in a story. I can sit here and tell you a story that you'll get all of this. But then when I look at it from a scientific point of view, and I look at it from a logical point of view, because I've been taught we live in the age of reason from a reasonable point of view, I come back to Piet and say, tell me, Piet, what am I talking about?
Like you, I also don't remember what I said or wrote a few years ago. So about this existence business, I think if you can measure it, it also doesn't exist outside the framework, yet it exists within the framework. So it depends on which stance you take there, definitely. So the whole question of going beyond duality, that is something which interests me very much. But science doesn't have much to say about going beyond duality yet. If you compare science...
Sorry, I'm going to stop you, but the reason I'm asking is because he's also a Buddhist. And that's why I'm asking you this question. Because you live in that duality. You're a scientist and you're a Buddhist. Now tell me.
Well, I'm not a card-carrying Buddhist, but... But I do have strong sympathies with a Buddhist way of looking at the world, as well as Taoist, as well as Hinduists, certainly the non-dual Advaita Vedanta type views, as well as many aspects of Sufi Islam, medieval Christian mysticism. Whenever in a tradition people really go deeply into their own experience and find something real, that for me is very interesting, and that is equally experimental for me as science. And the difficulty is that when scientists have a dialogue with people from these ancient traditions, the main problem is that science is so young. Science is only 400 years old. We just got started. It's only 10 generations. That's not much. So if you have a dialogue between science and Buddhism or science and Taoism, in a way, it is not yet, science is like the teenager on the block who is a little bit excited about all the new knowledge they have. It hasn't really been shaken down. It hasn't really been sorted out very much. So no wonder that there is some mismatch there. And to give you one example of the mismatch here, science is very proud that it is empirical. Science says we base everything on measurement, not speculation, but measurement and experienced experiments. But whenever you do an experiment, whenever you have an experience, there is a subject having an experience of an object. I see a wall, I hear a sound, whatever. And science has for 400 years focused on the objective side of experience. So everything is objectified, and the subject and the interaction has been sort of shoved out of the way. But I think in the next 400 years, the subject and the interaction will get equal attention. So we really should talk again in another 400 years to get a more balanced view. And the reason that I think it is going to happen is that there are a few cracks in the wall of objectivism, of only object studies. now when we can measure the brain, can map it through fMRI, etc., we can make a dictionary between objective blood flow and subjective experience. So the subject has to come in. Also, in quantum mechanics, we know that there is no objective state of an atom or an electron or a photon. It depends on how you measure, your subjective choice of how you measure it, what you can find in principle. There is no really objective state. And also, if we try to make robots, we talked about Asimov. 50 years ago, Asimov envisioned a world of robots, not so much cell phones and computers. He talked about robots, and I think they still were using microfiche and stuff. So he didn't foresee the computer revolution, but people were convinced 50 years ago that we all would be walking around and robots would serve us. And where are the robots? And I think the reason that robots can at best vacuum the floor in a clumsy way still is that we don't understand the nature of the subject. We only understood the function of the heart after we could build a pump. So understanding how to build a pump makes you understand how the heart pumps blood. Unless we really understand the subjective nature, the subject nature of a subject, rather than describing it as an object, as science does, if we really understand the nature of a subject, then we can create a subject in our image and create a robot which really can autonomously function. So I think I see these cracks in the wall of the pure objective view of science. So I think it's a little bit early to really compare them.
So where does chaos come into this? You talked about chaos and said find meaning in chaos. I'd put it the other way around. To find chaos beyond meaning. And to let chaos, meaning go, and let the whole idea of meaning, it's like the weight of knowledge sits and sinks the idea of wisdom and takes away. And we sit, and to go beyond meaning in what is chaos, so let me be completely vulnerable here and see what happens. As a kid, I used to live here in London, and I went to London, not here, London, and I went to the London Zoo, and there was a tiger there, and I was feeling really bad that the tiger was brought from India and put into a zoo. And tigers pace up and down. And I started to walk up and down the cage. And as I walked this way, the tiger would come this way. And at one point I realized that there was no time lag. The tiger and I were walking together. And I tried to outdo the tiger. I just suddenly stopped, but the tiger already stopped. And I tried to walk, and I said, what is this tiger sensing in me? And to me, that was the fundamental nature of chaos. And I thought of Shiva at that moment, and I was looking at the statue of Shiva, and I was looking at that dance, and I was saying, if you try and dissect that dance between creation and destruction and all the little intersections in between, and you say, I will follow and dance with Shiva, and I will see those steps, it is chaos, so chaotic that you cannot dance with Shiva. Yet, there is a point in which you can get into harmony with Shiva, like the tiger and I got into harmony, and you could dance with Shiva if you got into harmony. And then it's not a question of following and understanding the pattern. It's a question of finding harmony. And so you go from structure, so you go beyond meaning and beyond structure to chaos, where you just let it go and then find harmony. And if you get that connect into harmony, you are living in chaos, but in the harmonious nature of the universal chaos. What the hell am I talking about? Please tell me. Sorry, I'm asking a scientist. Does that mean anything to guys what I'm talking about? Yeah, so tell me what I'm talking about then. These are just words, right? Or are there more than words? I'm sorry?
Why letting go is chaos.
I guess it's not why letting go is chaos. It is There is no chaos without letting go. Yeah? Sorry. I know it's not question time yet. I actually want Piet to come in because I find this fascinating still. I hit my hand on a wall and I hurt. And yet I know that I don't hurt because the wall doesn't exist and my hand doesn't exist and I don't exist. And there was no time difference. I mean, I need that force, right? So there has to be linear time from that idea of this hand to the wall to create the force that I break my fingers on. And yet there's no linear time. It's fascinating. And I can create great stories out of it. But how do I perceive it? How do I experience that? And when I experience it, how do I live in the duality? You're the scientist. Right.
Well, what you just described is a very good description of scientific research. When people think about scientific research, they think about something very logical and very rational. But to really get a new idea, to be stuck somewhere and then to grope in the dark and suddenly get a new idea, this creativity from which a mathematician gets a new mathematics idea or a physicist a new physics idea or any scientist, I think is very similar to the creativity in art. The main difference is that after you get an idea, then the way that the scientist tests what comes out is by doing a calculation, by an experiment, looking at internal consistency. That is different. Artists have a different way to test it. But to say that science is rational, it would be like saying that sports is about timekeeping. And if you run a marathon, somebody has to use a stopwatch, and at the end you see with a stopwatch who won. But sports is not about stopwatches. That's just sort of like the last step. So I think science is not about rationality. That's only the last step to check what you had done. So I think science is in fact much more like art, and much more, what we are doing is much more similar than what most people think.
I think you said it. I can get that. No, that's absolutely right. Sport and running is not about stopwatches, but at one point we need to impose a stopwatch in it to make it valid for ourselves. And so the question really becomes is, why do we need a stopwatch to make it valid? And surely that's the question. Why is it just not sport? So the validity, science is making us, what is that validity we need out of science? It's strange. Why do we need the stopwatch?
I think what is special about science, and maybe that is really unique, is the way it builds over the generations. I mean, now that you called me a Buddhist, which is fine, it's a reasonable approximation, I can take a Buddhist metaphor. In Buddhism, there is the idea of a Buddha and a Bodhisattva. And a Bodhisattva postpones becoming a Buddha in order to help other people. And if I may take some liberty here with a comparison, you can say that the scientist also postpones the ultimate understanding of the nature of reality in order to really go very slow and to hand something to the next generation and the next generation to build on. I think a big difference between a scientist and a philosopher, for example, is that most philosophers try, or at least traditionally tried, in their own lifetime to get a whole picture of the meaning of everything. Whereas a scientist takes what has been really well established in theory and experiment, in the dance of theory and experiments together, and then add a little bit to that. And every scientist has their own idea about what they understand about reality, but what they produce is just a little extra layer and really test it, go very slowly, and then the next generation can build upon that. So it's a postponement of trying to figure out what is really real. So maybe the scientists are the bodhisattvas of our age.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I go on like this. We're ready for questions whenever. Is that all right?
We can do it anytime.
Sure. Yeah, I just.
Okay,
yeah.
so this is what we have to do. We have microphones on either side of the house, and so that this doesn't become totally an example of chaos. And that we can extract a little meaning out of it. We'll do it in some semblance of order, and I'll try and be as fair as I can. Let's have, I know, so you had your hand back up the second to last row, and then let's take you, yes. Keep your hand up though, sir, because, and the mic will come to you. So you can stay seated. So let's have the first question, if you don't mind. Let's have the house lights up a little more, if you don't mind.
You kept speaking to time as being either accelerating or happening timelessly. But we see like entropy always happens on an accelerating curve. No matter how fast you travel through the universe, we experience time as moving forward. So where's the value in looking at it as timeless in a scientific mind rather than just as a purely philosophical exercise?
I'm going to say something to that, but that's obviously a question for Piet. But I would say, for me, I question the assumption that that's scientific. I question the very assumption, and I ask myself constantly, is linearity a construct of my ego? Because fundamentally, what I need, I exist because I do, right? And so there is a fundamental process. I do, therefore something gets done. The relationship between do and done is the fundamental nature of my ego, because if it doesn't get done, then my doing and done, where's my ego existing? It exists between these 2 points of doing and done. And the only way I can separate the doing and the done is by linearity of time. So I question that fact, that is it just a construct of my own ego for my ego to know that it exists? But that's still philosophical. I agree. But I'm questioning the fact that you are assuming that one is right. But from Piet.
Yes, I agree with Shekhar. There are a whole lot of assumptions. And when I said science is young, I really mean that. 100 years ago, we had a very different view of the nature of matter, let alone the general nature of reality. And it may very well be that a few hundred years from now, we have a very different picture. It's very unlikely that the present snapshot of science is what science will grow into. My guess would be that in another 400 years, we will understand much more about the subject pole of experience. Maybe in another 1,000 years, we will reach timelessness within science, if science keeps growing. But at the moment, we are not there yet. So timelessness within the framework of science doesn't have any meaning. So when I talk about it, and when Shekhar and I discuss that, that is outside the current picture of science. Doesn't mean that it has to be philosophical, or at least not philosophical in a speculative or theoretical way, because we can work with our direct experience. We can use our own life as a laboratory, and we don't need tools. We all have our own consciousness to work with already. And if we really ask ourselves, do we experience timelessness or do we experience time? At that moment that we ask that question, we can compare notes, and anybody can do that. And I can say a lot more about that, but we probably should have time for other questions too.
This is your show. So, yes, we've got the second question back.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Hey, Tyler, how are you doing? Great question. So, Shekhar, thank you so much for being here. I had the opportunity to watch, Shekhar, your TED talk on in TED India about the dance part of Elizabeth in the beginning, and the conversation that went on with the producers, and it got me thinking a lot, especially what Liet was talking about with the dance between theory and experiment. And I guess I want to pose the question to both of you, not only in a literal interpretation of dance, but how you both dance in your everyday lives, both in your different spheres of influence, both with science and then say art, in your professional life, and then also if you dance personally.
Shall we dance?
Actually, for an artist, or for anybody, it's the idea of not making that separation. How do I dance in my professional, personal life, or how do I dance? And then you forget the question, how do you dance? You just dance. For me, personally, it's now becoming more and more the idea of a chaotic dance, if you like, where nothing is stated in an absolute moment. So it just keeps going, and there is no division. So the lack of division between, say, what I'm saying now and what I'm saying to you, and maybe I can put myself in a state where I don't know what I'm going to say and what the next word is, and that kind of idea of this chaotic sense of gathering and being is the dance. And if I could go on with that for the rest of my existence, I'd be a very happy man. So that's what it means to me. What the question, I think that as I interpret what your question is, may not be your question, but that's the interpretation that I have of that. Right? Yeah.
It's interesting what you said about not knowing the end of a sentence when you begin. I remember, I guess I was about 14 years old or so. I remember walking on the street and suddenly sort of thinking about this and about that, and I saw my own thoughts coming up, and I was thinking a little bit about thinking. And suddenly I realized that when I speak, I can begin a sentence, but I don't know the end of the sentence. In most cases, you don't have a whole sentence lined out there. You just begin, and you trust that the end will come in a reasonable way. And I was so shocked by that. I mean, I stood still, and I thought, I'm not speaking my own sentences. There is no self, there is no me, there is not a little conductor there. And that was one of the ways that I discovered, you can say, chaos. And then later, when I started reading about Buddhism and about various other traditions, I thought, yes, of course, they know about that. How come I wasn't being taught these things? So I think the real challenge of our generation is to really get global knowledge together and global traditions together, and to translate it in a modern way that you don't have to go back to ancient pictures and metaphors, but that we can see it in a modern way. And I think scientists and filmmakers, for one, for two, have certainly a great role to play.
So unpredictability does not mean I cannot predict. It just means that I don't exist. So there is no, you see, it's constantly letting go of these keywords and these connections. So I'm going to be unpredictable. Hang on, that's not it. I am not going to exist. So then it becomes unpredictable. I hope.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could reflect on the coexistence of multi-temporalities in the creative part. You tell stories about the human world, and you tell stories about the universe. And so my question is, do you create the chaos of, like, experience time, narrating time, time of the story, storytelling time, and the reception time? And so is that something that you create, and again, the chaos goes beyond? I'm thinking about the kind of reception that you received in the Bandit Queen, So is this kind of like a confluence of the multi-temporalities that is the very basis for your creative energy? And you were listed as an interdisciplinary astrophysicist. So in getting some new stories about the universe, do various notions of time in different disciplines give you that sense of, like, a new sort of theoretical breakthrough comes through for you?
Well, I think if we really carefully look at our own experience, what we are creating is a self-image. What we are creating is an image of ourselves, an image of other people, and in order to make sense, we have learned to divide everything in categories, and we make all these distinctions, and it works. A child has to learn to make a difference between self and other. A child has to learn to talk. Talking means using categories and making divisions. So we have to learn to deal with all this fine structure in the world around us. But then the challenge is, as I see it, is to see that these constructions are really constructs. And if you then let go of all of that, and you make a distinction between what you have and what you are, I think that is the key. I normally say I am male, I am an astronomer, I am a Dutch person. It really means I have a male body, I have a male gender identity, I have a Dutch nationality, I have a profession called astrophysics. That is not what I am. So if we try to let go of what we have more and more, that's sort of like, I see that as a daily challenge. We might get more of a sense of what we really are.
Can I tell you a story? Sure. It's the only way I can tell you, answer the story. It's not really a story. It's like, I sometimes imagine myself floating through life. and I'm floating because I have a parachute of myself. And I feel safe under this parachute. And my parachute has a few controls, you know, I can pull this way, it'll go right, I'll pull this way, it'll go left, it'll go forward. And sometimes there's storms that'll buffet my parachute around, but I can survive. It's fine, it's life. And then someone comes to me and says, hey, look up. And I say, I don't need to look up, why should I look up? I say, just look up. And I look up, and there's no parachute. There never was. And then I panic, and I say, hey, I'm just falling, and say, look down. I don't want to look down, I'm falling. Look down. And I look down, I'm not falling into anything. So there's nothing to fall into. And there's no parachute. And I look up, and there was nowhere that I came from. So I didn't come from anywhere, I'm not going anywhere, I'm just, what am I doing? I'm not even floating, what's happening? So I say, then if I'm not coming from anywhere, then I'm not going anywhere, who am I? And say, aha, now you're asking the right question. Mm-hmm. So what do we do? What do I do? I create gods that pushed me. And I create gods that try to save me. And I create gods that bring the storms. And then I create gods that help me through the storms. And then I create gods that try to hold me. And then I create gods that are trying to destroy me. And so I'm creating stories constantly of evil gods and good gods. And you know what they are? They are our mythologies. Those are the stories that you'll see everywhere. And they're fundamentally, all of them are attempts of our minds and our egos to come to terms of the infinite, to come to terms with the infinite. And actually, that's all it is. To me, art. My heart. That's all it is the art of storytelling, or any art, is the attempt it's a survival kit. Because we live as that 10-year-old in an infinite universe and only feeling it finite. So I tell this, you know, I try and tell the story. It's my survival kit. So I create all of mythology. That's all it is. It's nothing but this idea, what you see in this exhibition and everywhere. It's saying, I will convert that into a statue for you so you can come to terms with the infinite world. Otherwise, you're in deep trouble because you're going crazy and you think I'm schizophrenic. Did that answer your question? Someone? Someone? Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
We have a question in the front row.
Yeah, I have two parts of my question. First, do you think that science is real? And I tell you why I'm asking it. I'm a former scientist, and what I used to do is create models that explain some aspects of reality. Does that mean that reality is the model? So we had Newtonian mechanics, we have quantum mechanics, we have other mechanics. So maybe science is not function not to provide the truth, but rather to explain certain aspects of reality. And my second question is, second part, what is intuition?
What is?
Intuition.
Intuition.
Shall I take reality and you intuition? Or
right.
shall we switch around? We can flip a coin and see.
It's fine. You start.
Well, people often talk about the map and the territory. They think the description is the map and the reality is the territory. But I would say there are at least three levels. There is the map, and there is the territory, and there is reality. The map is the theoretical description that science gives, and the territory is what happens to a reality if you colonize it, if you make it into a territory so that it becomes describable. So the theory and experiment of science is the interplay between the map and the territory, and what is real is an altogether different things. And what science is giving a description within the territory, within the territorial borders of a framework. And the nice thing is that science is growing. 100 years ago, science gave us a clockwork, very, very stiff picture of reality, and now it is already much more fluid, and who knows what will happen later on. Do you want to do the intuition?
I think intuition is the moments we realize that creativity lies not within us, but there's a universal creativity that exists almost everywhere in ether. And I think that all of us have the ability to tap into that creativity. And because we are saying, we're calling it intuition because we cannot describe it completely scientifically. And I think that when the poet writes his poetry or great poem, or when Mozart found the harmony in the contradiction of notes, and when Einstein found the contradictory moments of the equations that gave some kind of meaning, I think they were all intuitive moments, but as accessing the same source. The source was the same. The mind is like the Google, the editing machine was different. It was trained in another discipline. But that is not to take away. Otherwise, sometimes people say, well, that is just intuition. It's not. It takes years of what we call in India riyaz for a classical musician, to years of training to completely tune the whole mind and body to be in unison, so that when the intuition is accessed, it gets interpreted into something that is so tangible that it affects the subconscious of everybody. So I think that's the intuition, is the accessing of the universal creativity. That's the best way I think I can describe
it. Over here, hi.
Hi.
It's often said that science and art are both a search for truth and beauty, and that the hope is that they be found to be one and the same. And with that, many people like to say that science is only one way of knowing, and that art, faith, love, pain, and other such things are alternative ways of knowing and understanding. I'm curious what each of you think of that, or if it might be more fair to say that art, faith, and so forth are ways of experiencing, but for a true path to knowledge and understanding, we have only science. What would your thoughts be?
No, you go.
Okay. Science is very precise within its own framework. But to claim that science is the best or even the only way of knowing, I think is very limited. As I mentioned before, for one thing, science is much too young, and science is growing. If the current science would be the truth, then what would happen with the next revolution, the next deepening of what we can describe and understand within science? So, for example, the fact that we know very little about the subject, that has been off limits, almost literally. The fact that we cannot talk about values in science. It is so interesting when I watch my colleagues, some of my colleagues in science. They sometimes get very excited about how science is objective and not emotional and value-free. And they say, science should be value-free. And that is their strongest value. It's really amazing. But I think, I love science. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have chosen that. But the dialogue between science and whole different ways of knowing is something which will take a very long time. And if I can throw in a slogan here, one of my slogans is roots, not fruits. And when I see a science-religion dialogue, it's almost always what I call fruits, not roots. When people talk about bridging science and tradition, science and philosophy, science and religion, science and arts, there is this idea that you have this gap between science and something else, and you make a little bridge. The bridge is, for me, the fruit part. Like if I see some theologians talking with scientists, and often they are still white, male, almost dead theologians. And they talk with scientists, then They talk about the Big Bang is a form of high energy particles, and Genesis started with light, and that is somewhat similar, and it's very nice, and then they wine and dine and have another glass, and they had a dialogue between science and religion. But for me, that doesn't go very deep. A dialogue between science and religion that I see is that the scientist really goes into their creativity. What is this chaotic, intuitive, unnameable process from which the scientific insight comes? And what is the creative process from which artistic or religious insight comes? How can we compare those roots, not the fruits? How can we stand at these different points? How can we both descend into the canyon and there meet, rather than try to build a quick bridge? So that would be my answer.
I think there is one difference in the expression. I agree with Piet that both are trying to explain and understand truth. The one difference in the expression of art and the expression of science is that the expression of art is contradictory. The real expression of art lies in that which is not said. So, in the notes in the contradictory notes of Mozart's, let's say the Requiem, if you listen to the Requiem very carefully, it is a clash of contradictory notes that somehow creates harmony, and art lies in that harmony. It lies in the words that the poet actually didn't say, but in the verses that the poet created that clashed with each other, and then it created within you, the one who's experiencing the poem, it creates ideas and verses that have no words. So there are no meanings to the words. So art is consistently chucking out things that cannot have meaning, and therefore they connect you in a way to the duality. So it could be in any art. In storytelling, you have moral contradictions and you don't actually resolve them. So art does not have a resolution. Science constantly looks for resolution. And there's a fundamental difference in the expression of the search for the truth. That's, to me, one of the things of why I like art. But I can't do science because I can't resolve, and I live. An artist lives more easily with non-resolution.
Mm-hmm. But I think science is growing up. I talked about science being young and growing up. In the 20th century, the most interesting aspect, I think, about science is that at least mathematics and physics came to the point of knowing something about what they cannot know. Within mathematics, there is the Gödel paradox. There are other paradoxes which tell you that there are things which you can prove that you cannot prove whether they are right or wrong. And you can talk about them having to be right or wrong, but you can prove that you cannot prove what it is. It's that meta level. And in physics, there are uncertainty relations of quantum mechanics. And I don't want to go deep into that, but the fact that that you can prove that too, what sort of the limits are of your knowledge. Science is getting towards a stage. So I think if he would come back here in another 1,000 years, I think we would have a much more intimate dialogue.
Do you have the time?
What question is that?
1,000 years?
We have another question in the second row, and then we'll, yes, take one.
Shekhar, this is for you.
Hi.
Hi. We've been talking about chaos in the universe. I wonder what you think about how to be more in rhythm with the universe. And Piet, this one is for you, because I practice Buddhism too. So my question for you is, I believe Buddhism is much more powerful than science. I'm wondering, what are your views?
Mm-hmm. My question is easy.
Yeah.
It's the harmony.
But how does it?
Yeah. You see, there you go again, looking for something that is exact. But what I'm saying is that it's in the contradiction. If you state the harmony, then it's not harmonious. The harmony lies in the non-existence of the connection. So something, and if it came here and that clap, is harmonious, but don't define the clap, and you look for let me see the clap, it doesn't exist. So to find a definition of that harmony is to confine, to define is to confine that harmony, and the harmony exists, and in that harmony is the chaos. The chaos of non-existence exists in that harmony. Does that not, because if I'm going to ask you the question, does that make sense, and you say yes, then I'm wrong. If you say that makes no sense, then I could say yes. All right? Over to you.
Well, if I would try to compare Buddhism and science, I could also try to compare Buddhism and thermodynamics, or Buddhism and electromagnetism. But normally you take science as a whole, and even in physics you take all different parts as a whole. We don't have people in physics who really defend electrodynamics and who hate the people who do thermodynamics and the other way around. I mean, physics is just one body of knowledge. So I think the great thing about religions and traditions are that they cover a lot more than science covers so far. But the weakness is that they haven't yet found a way to work together. So science is very universal but still limited. So I think Buddhism can learn from science to work together with other mystics, other practitioners, other experimental investigators of reality in other traditions, the way science has done, and the science can learn from traditions to keep growing and get sort of a preview of what it will grow into. And if you look at the challenge of comparisons, or what we call in the West often interfaith dialogues, and I don't like the word faith because for me religion should be about hypothesis and then testing the hypothesis in your own heart, in your own mind, in your own life, seeing your life as a laboratory. So not blind faith, but an exploration. But if you want to compare different explorations in different traditions, you can either try to make a most common denominator approach, where you say, well, there is love, there is compassion, it's all very beautiful, and that's about the only thing which all these traditions have in common. Then you don't go very deep. So I think the better approach is to take the mystics, the practitioners, the people who really spend their life going deep into any particular tradition, and listen to what they say. And what they say is that the point of a tradition is not to reach out something and to gain something called enlightenment or heaven or whatever. The challenge is to see that everything is already there and to celebrate from that point. So if you start at the end of the path of what is already there, then you can have different paths, and that is where the paths meet. If you start at the beginning of the path, they are all very different, but the ends is where you can have a dialogue. The dialogue is about celebration, not about reaching.
After that thoughtful pause, we have a question in the fourth row. Yeah. And then we have a question in the second row. And anybody in the back? Yet? Oh, in the middle. We've got the middle. So that might will come to you shortly. Okay.
Two parts. First, you mentioned science. I might say this incorrectly. Science needs to understand the subject of the subject, not just the object, which is what it does right now. So if you could expand on that, because to me, that is either a breakthrough or just complete nonsense. So the second part, on the example of the stopwatch and running, it seems to me the necessary...
Sorry, the example of?
The stopwatch and running.
Sports, marathon.
Yeah. It seems to me the requirement of the stopwatch comes from the definition of the race, definition of the game, right? And then it seems to me, going further, that the structures that we have imposed on science have generated requirements, and we have ended up chasing those requirements as though they were the truth and not the structure itself. So my question really is that our education system, while I understand the need for structure, I understand why we need to go from structure to structure, kind of like stepping stones, but the goal of education should be, in my opinion, to be able to see the structure and then go to the next one. Mm-hmm. And now I think we've come back to Shiva, creation, destruction, creation, destruction, creation, destruction, but I don't see that being taught.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when my daughter was 3 years old, she used to talk about angels. And I asked her, I said, sweetheart, angels exist? She said, yes. I said, do they exist in reality? She said, yes. I said, do they exist only in your imagination? She said, yes. She got it right. She's 9 years old, and she has a problem with what she said at 3 years old. But she was right then. So you're right about our education.
Maybe our education stops too early. Maybe we have to continue and then go back to the 3-year-old. Since we have to learn the 9-year-old stage too, it would be not so good if you would skip that stage. So, but what you asked about the subject, see, the funny thing is, if I see a glass, then this is the subject, that is the object. But while I reflect on me seeing a glass, all of what I see and all of what I experience is my consciousness. Or I can see a glass or a wall as a piece of matter, but I can also see it as a conscious experience of a piece of matter. I cannot take a piece of matter, I cannot take a glass and put it in my consciousness. It doesn't fit. My consciousness only has room for experiences, conscious experiences of something. So independently, whether you're a realist or idealist, you can be a hard-nosed physicist and say everything really exists, or you can say, oh, it's all like a dream. Independently of how you view that is a philosophical question. The only experience you can have, the only conscious experience you can have is of consciousness. You can only experience experiences, and we call it a glass and we call it something. So there is this object here. This object has a subject looking at the object for me. At the same time, if I ask where is my mind is here, it's not in the head. My mind is everything I experience, all conscious experiences. So this little object here is sandwiched. This object is somewhere between the subject in which I see myself as a human being with a body and a brain, etc. There is this subject looking at this object, and then there is this outer subject of my mind looking at this subject-object given. So if we confuse the subject which I associate with body and brain, etc., with the subject which is given by my mind, which is much wider, then you get a very confused dialogue. So first of all, we should separate those two, and science isn't that far yet. Science is skipping this outer subject, but it will sneak in. Just give it some time.
But your question also, I think her question also was, do we need the stopwatch to validate the sport? That was it. And the question obviously is no, you don't need it. But that has always been the thing, that what Piet is saying is the stopwatch is the teenager idea of the larger aspect of sport. Mm-hmm. And at one point you'll have the two meet. I don't know how they'll meet, but that's what he's saying, it'll meet. But no, I think that's it. No, you don't need the stopwatch to validate sport. It's just that we need to validate some form of existence beyond the larger idea. And that's just part of the way we are. I need to see a movie, but it's not enough to see a movie. I need to look at the box office figures. Why do I need to do that? Why can't it just be a movie, you know? Okay.
So I know we have a question in the second row, and we had a question, and you've got a microphone. Why don't you start, and then we'll come to.
I wanted to come back to the question of wisdom. I think both of you have touched on that word. And just thinking about the arts.
Where are you? Oh, yeah.
Right here.
Okay.
Just thinking about it first from the side of the arts and the creative sciences. I think of art as a creative science. You know, somehow when you look at how people in decision-making positions make decisions, to what extent are they influenced by their values, their feelings, an extraordinary movie, a piece of art in that decision that they're making? and to what extent do they turn to the data and the evidence and the research. And I feel that these days, the former is very much devalued, and the latter is very much raised up. But even when we look at research and evidence as a way of making decisions, it's often manipulated. So we use data and research when it's convenient to serve underlying agendas and decisions that have already been made on the basis of values that haven't been described. So to the extent that we can be more honest about how both influence the way our leaders make decisions, the way we make decisions, and understand the limitations of the quantitative and the evidence base, and the need to make decisions even in the face of uncertainty and lack of available decision knowledge. I want to understand from both of your perspectives where you see your relative creative arts and more scientific and descriptive arts playing into how we as human beings make wise decisions.
Okay. I could talk just personally on this. I think that, yeah, I think decisions, you're right. Certainly from a very mundane, if I may call it, point of view, people always make decisions and then go out to validate them. And sometimes some of the great decisions or discoveries have been made intuitively, we talked about that, and because we don't trust intuition, that we need, otherwise what would business graduates do? So we go back and try and validate them, and then we need the business graduates to validate them. But to me, in terms of what I'm doing, often when I'm directing, I'm asking myself, I prepare a lot. I prepare, and I'm obsessive about preparation. I'm also very fearful about preparation. And then often when I go onto the set, I find ways to destroy preparation. And the one way I find to destroy preparation is, what can I do to my mind that it does not exist at the time that actually I'm directing? And so that what is emerging, I give chaos a chance to emerge, uncontrolled chaos a chance to emerge. And that must be the fundamental problem with every artist who thinks and thinks and thinks about writing a novel, but is hoping that when the character is speaking, the character is being accessed and somewhere else is speaking. But that doesn't mean that there's no preparation. So there's this fundamental question of, where does the decision-making process then lie? Are you in control? Are you deciding, or is the decision deciding? Does the event of deciding have its own individuality that is quite separate from yours? And actually, as a film director, or sometimes when I write poetry, I'm hoping that is true. And the way I try and access is panic. I've talked about that in TED, but I keep saying that at one point, everybody uses tricks. Because the mind tricks you, then you trick the mind. And how do you trick the mind? I trick the mind by constantly questioning it and putting it in such panic that it doesn't know what it's doing, and then something might flower, and in which case, instead of be the director, I can be the gardener and watch things grow organically and just keep the mind away from trying to control everything. But would I be able to do that without a lot of preparation? I don't think so. So it's a constant battle between discipline and indiscipline. So that's from my point of view.
Yes, that sounds all very familiar in my,
okay.
my approach too, yeah. As for your question about science, I think what the world needs is something deeper, something much more fundamental, something much simpler than extra scientific knowledge. It's very important that we learn more about the details of global warming and ecological destruction, etc., etc. But if we don't have the political will to implement what we learn from science, it's not going to be that useful. There is so much knowledge about what is going wrong in the environment right now, but how do we apply it? So for me, the answer to that question lies not in the results of science, but it's again the roots not fruits approach. What I like about science is that science goes beyond belief and disbelief. If somebody comes up with a new idea in science, we don't believe it. We don't say, oh, it's a great new fashion, let us go in that direction. We say, that's interesting, let's test it. It's a hypothesis. And we also don't believe the current state of science. We are open for the next step. So if you're a scientist, you get brownie points for coming up with a really interesting new idea, and you get brownie points for shooting it down. And you get brownie points if you shoot your own theory down too, if it was an interesting enough idea. Now, there have been cases like that. Science is the ultimate bipartisan activity. It is really conservative, it really wants to test things, it's really progressive, it really is always interested to find something new. That's the biggest challenge, to show that there is something more than what we have seen so far. So this method of being open and going beyond belief and disbelief and really holding something open and playing with it, that method, I think, could be applied to politics, to economics, to our view of ourselves, the self and other, to all the tribal thinking which we're all being caught up in. And one way that I'm trying to implement that, and with a bunch of other people interested in this, that I'm exploring this now, is that I'm using the internet through the virtual world of Second Life. And for the last couple of years, I get together with a bunch of friends in Second Life a few times a day. Not everybody every day, but we have a group which regularly meet. And in that way, where we can easily meet each other from wherever we are in the world, we talk about these kind of questions, and we have a very, very simple experimental hook, because otherwise it's only talk. What we do is that in our real life, every 15 minutes we stop for a few seconds. I originally designed it as 9 seconds, because every 15 minutes is 900 seconds. So if you pay 1% time tax, then for 1% of the time you stop all this exciting stuff you're doing. And the only little slogan I gave was, drop what you have to see what you are. And everybody does it in a different way. Everybody has different ways of dropping what you have, and the same person has different ways in different days or different quarters of an hour. And 4 times a day we get together in Second Life and we compare notes of what happens when we try to drop what we have to see what we are. And the name I gave to it is Play as Being. If you do Google on Play as Being or on my name or whatever, it's easy to find. If you start with a non-dual picture where everything is already as it is, and everything is capital B being, not part of it, but is already as a whole, then the way to understand duality and the everyday way of appearing is that somehow this capital B being is playing us. And if it is playing us being completely lost and not knowing what to do. So if we return the compliment and if we try to play being, then maybe being playing us playing being, maybe that can short circuit and maybe something comes out of that. And it seems to work. I mean, so far so good. Many people have reported that things really perked up when they started doing that. And the nice thing is we are comparing notes the way scientists compare notes. There is no pope, there is no priest, there is nobody higher than others. It's ultimately democratically. But we just have a good time celebrating our exploration. So that's my little contribution to the big problems.
Yeah, I want to ask about, I guess reason seems to create 2 spaces. It seems to create the space of the rational, which apparently is not a belief because you can prove it with the reason over time. And it also seems to create this, and so reason's kind of seeking itself to verify itself. And then that also seems to create another place, the sacred place of the not rational, which seems to be the traditional divide between art and science, with the scientist saying, I don't believe anything, I know it. And the artist saying, don't come near me, I'm creating. But isn't there a third way, which is the way of the craftsman, who is kind of like surfing on the chaos of, I have a friend who makes productions and he says in every production there's a crisis, and that's the crisis at which the expectation meets the reality. And I'm sure when you were making films, you experienced that chaos. And when you were putting supercomputers together from PC parts, you experienced that chaos. So I guess that's what I'm wondering about, if that duality is artificial, and if craft really carries the way to a kind of unifying our mind and our body.
It's interesting, every time you talk about the irrational, you look at me and we talk about rational. But you're right. I mean, art is rational and irrational, and science is rational and irrational. Let me just try and answer your question another way. You're saying there is all this discussion, and then there is the doing. And then there's the doing of the craftsman is doing, and when you're making films, you're doing. I get this question asked because when I talk about this very idea of whether you are arriving at a decision that is an event that is already has its own individuality, or you are driving the event. And when I talked earlier about the fact that this connection between doing and done, and if I take away the connection between the doing and the done, you're saying, so where is the done? That's also your question. And my only answer to that is, try not doing the done. You cannot do it. If you could do it, you would be the Buddha. That fact that I cannot, that's the human condition, is that we do. And if we don't, we consciously don't, therefore that is also being done. You know? So we're doing, constantly doing, that's our condition. And if you could consciously not do as against just being lazy, then you are the Buddha, right? If I could consciously not make films, except say, I don't want to do it today, I'm consciously not doing, then there is a state that you're achieving. That's a very, very tough state. I don't know anybody that I know personally who cannot do the done. Damn, very tough. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
The word I would use is tinkering. For me, my experience of science, art, craft, anything interesting in my life the basis has been tinkering. When I was in elementary school, I tinkered with model railroads, and I got a little telescope when I was age 12, and then I started to make rockets, and then I discovered that it was possible to take motorcycles apart and make them go faster. A friend of mine was the son of a blacksmith, and we lived in a small village, and we knew where the one policeman was nearby, so we had all kinds of freedoms, and it was before terrorism too. So we tinkered a lot, and then when I was 17 years old, I stumbled upon a book about Hinduism, and then I realized that, by golly, these guys are tinkering with their minds. And I thought, that is fun, let me try that too, and then I was hooked. And the whole idea of using your mind as a laboratory and using a motorcycle or a rocket, whatever, I mean, it's the same spirit, it's the same approach.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Is this what you expected to happen after 10 years, meeting in public and talking about these ideas?
I didn't have any expectation. I bet you didn't either.
No, I didn't, but I enjoy being in public and being vulnerable in public because if I lose, I gain.
And if you lose, we gain.
Yeah.
Any final comments? Because we've run out of time, as it were.
One last question here.
Unless you want to choose one question out of the audience, or do you want to wrap up yourselves?
We are here. I'm here to say I have no choice. I'm not going to choose. Do you want to choose?
No,
Let's leave it to random things.
Yeah.
I have one last question, by the way, here.
Oh, we do? We have? Oh, so that's random enough. All right, there we go.
Okay, I'm going to keep this simple. If you two were to exchange your profession, if you two were to exchange your profession, you be a filmmaker and you be a scientist, what story would you tell, and what would you create, or what would you invent or experiment or study about?
Well, I can tell you that you're absolutely right. I have no answer to that except that Piet is wanting me to write a script and I wanted to learn theoretical physics. And so you're absolutely right. We're desperately wanting to change positions for a long time. It's just that I don't know that Piet will write a great story, but then he doesn't know whether I'll be very good at it. So tell me your question again.
Again.
So say it again.
Okay, if you two were to exchange a profession, let's say for the rest of your life, okay, you become a scientist and you are given an opportunity, you give everything you want to study what you want to study about, chaos, harmony, anything in terms of science, and you are given an opportunity to make a film, to create something, something that would mean something to you as a filmmaker, not as a scientist, but as a filmmaker. So how would you two, or what would you do? Like Shekhar Kapur, you as a scientist, and Piet, you as a filmmaker.
Well, my first reaction was we really should work together then, since I think I can learn a few things from this guy here. And also, we already, as Shekhar said, we started talking about that, how we would do that. And we were thinking, if one day Shekhar would make a science fiction movie, maybe we can actually collaborate. So it may yet still happen, but that would not be a complete role reversal. If there would be a complete role reversal, what I would try to do is try to see whether I could use the medium of a film to try to give a sense of what it is to live in non-duality. And what it is like to deal with duality from a point of view of non-duality. It is like being playing me and me playing being. And to get that sense, and it is beyond words, it is beyond concepts, that is true. But you can use words and concepts and images as pointers and giving some sort of experience. And that would be my greatest challenge.
Yeah, because perception varies from human to human, like individual to individual. So as a scientist, you cater to, major population, and as a filmmaker as well, there is your own perception, your own voice that you want to put out there, and as well as you got to keep the business aspect to it to make sure that other people understand or get what you're trying to, pass the message on. So,
I think if I was a scientist, from who I am at this state, I would try and find a way through physics to measure the universe from within the universe, but not by not stepping outside the universe. I would try and write the equation that proved the existence of God, but the equation is God itself. Mm-hmm. That's what the attempt would be. Boy, somebody's going to kill me for that. Yeah. All right.
No, we're just going to stop you right there because I don't think there's anything we can continue. We honor the Buddhist traditions at this museum largely through the art, but when visitors come and share their ideas and bare their souls, we like to honor them with a katak, which is, in the Tibetan tradition, a silk scarf that is interwoven with auspicious symbols to protect them, or maybe even if you hold it out right, it could become a parachute. Who knows? Piet, thank you so much for being here. Let me present this to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you.
And Shekhar Kapur. I also went to London Zoo when I was a child, but all I remember my aunt telling me was the tiger pissed on me. Shekhar, you will always do so much better. Well, now, what is there but free stuff? Remember your visit information card. Please hand them to Chris at the or Marin at the end, and we'll put a winning one, random, of course, out of the hat, just like that fabulous random last question. Thank you so much for coming out, and spread the good word. Thank you very much.
Thank you.